Okay, so we're moving on to Mr. Charles Doaran. He's from the University of Cincinnati, and he's going to talk to us today about telerobotic surgery in extreme environments. Please welcome Mr. Doaran.
Okay, well, let me get my presentation up real quick. Are there any surgeons in the room? So if there's any questions, go see him, because I'm not a surgeon. Any medical doctors in the room? Okay, I'm not a medical doctor either, so there's your two guys right there. So I put this presentation together last night at 150 some slides, and I came back this morning and looked at it at 6 o'clock instead of running. And I thought, I better trim this down because there's a lot of information in here and a lot of interesting things that we've done over the last, say, 15, 20 years. I actually work at the University of Cincinnati, but I also work at NASA headquarters and have worked there for almost 20 years, primarily focusing on crew health, developing technologies for telemedicine, and about 5 or 6 years ago, the University of Cincinnati became one of the leading centers in the United States, primarily with Army funding, to look at telesurgery. So I just kind of give you a little bit of the background. I think we wanted to set the stage by kind of telling a little bit about how the world is different today than it was perhaps when we were in college or maybe when we were even small. I oftentimes look at my kids and see how many gadgets they have, and my daughter's had 4 cell phones and she's only 13. But she has, the Xbox and the Game Boy, although I'm not sure why they call it a Game Boy because she's a girl. But anyway, we have all these really cool toys, and a lot of those technologies came out of the space program. They also came out of the space race and a lot out of the Cold War itself. But if you think about some of the things that we are focusing on today, or not necessarily focusing, but are affecting our decisions and what we're doing, it's sort of listed here. And I don't need to go through them. You all know what they are, but I would venture to say that when it comes to telesurgery and robotic surgery, there's a lot of people like this fox, except I wouldn't necessarily say it was a head or it was in the snow. It could be somewhere else. But with that said, a lot of times when we think about change, we need to be proactive. These guys need to get away from the water, of course, if they want to be a meal. So the objectives then is, what is robotic surgery? What is telemedicine? What is telesurgery? That's sort of a combination of the two. Some extreme environments, and although I do work at NASA, I'm not going to show too many NASA pictures. I am going to show you some graphic pictures right before lunch, so I apologize for that. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and issues. Some of these slides I use in a public health, global health presentation, so you can kind of see some of the things we've done around the world. They may have a relationship, they may not. So these are some pictures of Katrina, and why do I show you pictures of Katrina? Well, if you think about disaster response, telesurgery, telemedicine are very key in being able to respond. And why is that necessarily related to space travel? Well, we have limited bandwidth in space. We have limited, for instance, on the way to Mars, if Mars is the farthest point from the Earth, it's 22 minutes one way. So imagine the astronaut coming on the surface of Mars, grabbing his chest and say, "Houston, I have a problem." 22 minutes later, Houston says, "What kind of problem is it?" 22 minutes later, it's a little too late. So you can't take those necessary drugs to stop whatever's going on. So we have to look at developing technologies in both telecommunications and information systems and sensors and robotics that we can use for healthcare that will provide us a useful system on the way to Mars or to wherever Obama wants to send us. Okay, well, let's see. I don't need that. Okay, so I would also say that healthcare, telemedicine, telesurgery, robotic surgery, we don't need to be rocket scientists. And many of us, of course, are rocket scientists, and that's nice, but it doesn't necessarily mean we need to be because it doesn't have to be complicated. We wrote a paper on some work that we were doing in the Balkans after the Balkans War, which was prosecuted by President Clinton during the 1990s, actually created a unique country called Kosovo, although not recognized by Russia and Serbia for a variety of reasons. But we looked at how can we develop a telemedicine system for enabling better health care in an environment where everything was destroyed, primarily because of ethnic cleansing, but also because the books were destroyed, they were all burned, and so on. So it's sort of like what happened during the 30s. So we came up with this initiate, build, operate, transfer, and we're actually in the process of doing that now in both Macedonia and in Albania. So there's a lot of interest around the world in how do we use technology to better enable healthcare. So I wasn't going to put this thing in here, but I always think it's kind of interesting, and many of you may have seen this before. But down in the corner it says what the customer really needed. This is the way the customer explained it. And of course, these are all the people who are involved. And what's most important is that no one documented it. And if you think about, I'm actually lucky enough to get a grant from the National Library of Medicine to write a book about space medicine experts, pioneers, men and women who've served both in the United States and the Soviet Union / Russia and Europe, who have served as physicians for astronauts since the late 50s, all the things we've done in human spaceflight. And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of that information was never documented. And in fact, a lot of the medical systems we use in the Apollo program, we can't read the tapes the information's on because the tape machines don't exist anymore. So we have to start thinking about how do we collect data, very important, especially on the way to Mars, how we're going to be able to look at that in the future. These next couple of slides kind of talk about change. I always think it's kind of funny, we don't believe there's a market for computers for individuals. This was about 1984, 83, 84. Somebody at IBM made that comment. I'm sure they're probably not there anymore. Internet, Bill Gates said, what are we going to use that for? And of course now, that was when Mosaic and Netscape 1.0 were the two main browsers. Now you have Internet Explorer, which I think pretty much everybody uses, or maybe some people use Firefox. And this was probably a year or so ago, Polaroid no longer sells film. I'm not sure Kodak might go that way too, but right now, most things are digital, and that in and of itself has some challenges as well. Some other changes I think are important to note to sort of set the stage, and although I could go down a path and just discuss this kind of stuff for the next couple of hours, I don't mean that literally. The thing in the middle is a stethoscope. And in 1816, René Théophile Hyacinthe Laennec, French name, he was going to examine a patient, and the standard of care at that time was to put your ear on the patient's chest and to listen to the heart and the lung sounds, and to determine what's happening. And that was sort of part of the examination. This female patient said, "You're not bringing your head anywhere near my chest." So he's like, "Well, I got to examine this patient to see what's wrong with her." So he rolled up a magazine and put it up against his ear and against her chest, and was able to hear the heart and the lung sounds. And his colleagues thought he was an absolute idiot. So that's not the standard of care. That's not the way we practice medicine. That's not the way we were taught. That's not the way we do things. It's just not going to work. Another example is Dr. Semmelweis. He asked, this is back in the 1700s, he asked a midwife why her patients were surviving childbirth more than his patients as a physician. Turns out the physicians were coming right from the anatomy lab or the cadaver lab in the morning without washing their hands. It wasn't the standard of care, and when he said to other physicians, "We need to start washing our hands," they tarred and feathered them and ran them out of town. It wasn't the accepted standard of care. People were unwilling to change. So we could say the same thing about advancing healthcare. Electricity. Most operating rooms today are inside the hospital, not on the outside wall. They were on the outside wall so they could use ambient light to see, but electricity changed that. I wouldn't want to get an EKG from this guy. Enough said, it looks scary. Standard teaching practice. This is a famous painting from the University of Pittsburgh. I don't know if it was painted there, but it hangs there. And depending on the audience, you could say these guys are all attorneys or HMO executives, or perhaps they're senators. I don't know. But they're sort of learning, and the reason why I show this is that the guy sitting in the back, kind of, the professor leaning back, kind of like this, he's explaining to these students, do we have a pointer? He's explaining to these students that, I'm not sure it works, but anyway, you can see down here, the one physician with the glasses is saying, you see this yellow coloration in the neck, and these students up in the back are going, look, I live in Iowa. We don't see those kind of accidents, so I'm not going to worry about that. And so he or she, well, in this case, all he, they're not going to really pay attention to that. And so what happens is that these people up in the audience, they're going to learn, but they're never going to really repeat that activity, and therefore, it's not going to sink in. But with technology today, you can actually broadcast a live surgical event outside the operating room. The operating room, as we know, I hope not very many of you have been in the operating room, but if you have, it's really one of startling isolation. A lot of people in there are nurses, they're students. Down at UC, at least, we have students, same here at Wright State or Greater Miami Valley Hospital. And the interaction is with the doctor and the patient and the people in that room. But in the future, meaning maybe tomorrow, not literally Friday, but in the next bit of time, the physicians and the surgeons are going to actually be able to interact with people that are not really located in the room they are. And that becomes a very important tool. Just a quote from Charles Darwin. And of course, this happens. It's actually a city in Michigan. I went to Ohio State, so I can say that. So at any rate, sometimes people just don't get it. And I'll use an example. When I came to the University of Cincinnati, I came there to develop the Center for Surgical Innovation, which is primarily developed to develop robotic surgery and telesurgery, which Dr. Broderick, you'll see some pictures of him in a few minutes. We really developed the university as a top-notch place to do that. Our chairman decided to go to Chicago, and we got a new chairman. He's a breast surgeon. And his comment was, why on God's green earth would you ever use a robot to do surgery? If you're going to do breast surgery, you wouldn't, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do that. I'm just kidding. So he's a believer that this is going to happen. I mean, he didn't really say this was going to happen, but he is unwilling to change his thoughts because that's not the way he learned. So look at Semmelweis, look at Laennec. These individuals were pioneers in their field, and people didn't believe it. There's a lot of people out there that believe we never went to the moon. There's a lot of people that believe that we're never going to go to Mars, and I would advocate they're wrong, because we are. It may be, my grandkids' generation that does the Mars trip, but we'll wait and see. This chart kind of is a little older now, but if you think about healthcare, still in this very low level compared to technology and business. Society began to catch up because everyone wants an iPad, a Kindle device, a cell phone, a GPS, a Garmin, whatever gadget Best Buy sells, my kids want it. At any rate, communications and bandwidth. When I talk about bandwidth, does everyone know what I mean by bandwidth? Everybody has a computer at home or access to the internet. You have a dial-up modem. Most of you probably know what a dial-up modem is. You ask college kids, they're like, what's that? And the other thing you ask college kids is, do you ever have a phone on the wall? They go, phone on the wall? What do you need a phone on the wall for? Like this one over here by the exit. He's like, wait, we never had that. My mom and dad have that. They would say their parents have it, but they don't have it. So bandwidth is very important for doing robotic telesurgery. If you think about getting on 75 and driving from here to the Brent Spence Bridge in Cincinnati, right where the stadiums are, the Reds and the Bengals, good luck with that, by the way, because there's all this construction. Because I passed through coming up here. It wasn't so much like this because they weren't all Beetles, or whatever kind of car that is. That's actually, I think, taken in China. The reason why I use this to illustrate is that if I want to have unlimited bandwidth, the size of the pipe, nobody on it but me, then I need an empty road and a really fast car. So it'd be awesome, as I tell students, it'd be awesome to get in a Lamborghini and drive from Columbus to Cincinnati, or the other way around. Get as fast as you want, no police, no traffic, no deer. That's a whole other story. I hit a deer in South Dakota. My car's still out there, by the way. And so bandwidth becomes very important. So if we want to do something, we need to have the right kind of bandwidth. Well, in order to do telemedicine or telesurgery, you need some kind of form of communication devices.